Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Social Media Club event, Building Your Digital Resume. My name is Eric Pradum. I'm the president of Social Media Club St. Louis. Before I introduce our guests, a little housekeeping. We have a very small set of questions planned for our guests today, so we'll give them time to answer and discuss. But we do have both the chat and Q&A functions here. So please use the Q&A function when you have a question for me or our guests. And if you simply have something to say to other attendees, I encourage you to use the chat function and make sure that you select the option for all attendees and not just the panelists to see your message so that we can hopefully have a lively discussion today. Next month, Social Media Club is planning an in-person event. If I recall our calendar correctly, I know we're planning one for April. We're still lining up all of the details for those. So if you're interested, please sign up for email, follow us in social media, or reach out to me, and we'll make sure to try and get you the details when they're ready. Before we jump into the questions, I'll introduce our guests and let them do some shameless promotion. First up, we have Rebecca Dohrman, senior lecturer at Olin Business School at Washington University. Rebecca's research and teaching interests center on crisis communication, organizational communication, and how we can meaningfully integrate new technologies into modern organizations and the socialization of young people, particularly women, into high-tech fields. Her consulting work focuses on local initiatives to improve computing programs in elementary and middle schools to increase engagement with and confidence in young people for high-tech career tracks like computing. Rebecca, I believe that you, like me, spent a long time in college, because I have read Rebecca here has a PhD in organizational communication. I do not have a PhD. I just happened to spend 8 years in college, for what it's worth. Rebecca has a PhD in organizational communication from Purdue University and an MS in software development from Maryville University. Additionally, she earned an MA degree in communication and a Bachelor's of Arts in Spanish. I went for German and international studies. Right? Yep. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Seattle earlier. So I'm from Seattle. I moved to St. Louis 3 years ago. And also, Rebecca is married with 3 children. And if I also have 3 children. So if you're local to St. Louis, Rebecca's favorite restaurant in town is Guido's on the Hill. Rebecca, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Are there places people can find you or things you want them to know about you or your organization?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Eric. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm a former board member of the Social Media Club. And as I was thinking about some of the questions we're going to talk about today, I was just thinking about the many wonderful networks in St. Louis. And I'm delighted to be at Washington University. And it's been a fantastic experience. And I'm really excited to chat with you about some of the things we talk to students about, and delighted to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And since we're talking about resumes today, I know it's perhaps a little bit different since Washington University is a big organization, but I thought I would throw out there, if there's any chance if someone in your university is hiring and you know where people can go, either just let them know or put something in the chat or whatever, because I'm sure we have plenty of people here who are both hiring and also looking to be hired, if you have anywhere to point people.
I'll throw link in the chat for the overall job board, and always happy to chat with people as well.
Awesome.
But no specific jobs in my area.
Yeah, I can understand that. So next up, we have Andrew Dowska of Rogers Townsend. Andrew joined RT as CEO in 2017, taking the baton from founder Tim Rogers. A 20 plus year veteran of agencies. He's led Effie-winning cross-functional teams from TBWA, Shy at Day, Wonderman, Carmichael Lynch, and Leo Burnett, which is a pretty cool resume, in my opinion. Andrew's varied experience gives him a particular understanding of the tension between speed and craft inside a modern creative agency. Andrew is also the father, chauffeur, and fan of 2 very active sport boys and husband to a very patient wife. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Are there places people can find you or things you want them to know about you or your organization?
Yes, well, thanks for having me. And I'm already going to say that I'm feeling inferior to you both, and that I only have 1 degree and 2 children. So you two have already bested me. Thank you very much on that front. No, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just Andrew Dowska, look me up. I'm on Instagram and all the usual places. I would say just to echo the sentiment of, like, as an agency, we're always looking for interesting people. We obviously always have some open roles, but also we just want to know who the great bench of talent is. So please reach out to Carrie Muehlman, who's our talent head at the agency, and you can find us on the website or find me via LinkedIn.
Awesome. I think I recall seeing recently a director of strategy role with
Yes.
Rogers Townsend. I'm sure there may very well be others. We heard about some pitches going on, so hopefully there's some growth going on and some hiring going on there.
Indeed. Yep.
And lastly, before we get to our questions, my company, Big Wide Sky, is also hiring. Really, we're in the later stages of interviewing people, but technically, we do still have some positions open. We have 2 client services roles open, and we're hiring a futurist. So if you work in client services, culture, strategic foresight, organizational development, change management, innovation, or product development, you can contact me at eric@bigwidesky.com or check out our job posts that I will put in the chat shortly. And if any of you out there that are listening or watching, if you're hiring, please post links or other information in the chat. Or if you're looking for a new position, share your LinkedIn profile or other information in the chat with the group as well, so that, hopefully beyond having some good conversation here today, we can perhaps help connect the right people with one person with another person. So let's get into our discussion. And like I said, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature, or if you have something to say, please use the chat and select the option for all attendees to see your message. We're talking about building a digital resume here, and I'm going to start broad. Andrew, Rogers Townsend is a decent sized organization, so you're hiring people now and then. Generally, what would you like to see when you come across someone's resume or online portfolio?
Sure. I would say, like any organization, we're constantly evolving. What we do tomorrow is different than what we would have done 2 years ago, 4 years ago. What we'll be doing in 2 years will be different, and 4 years will be different. So part of what I'm always looking for, I'd say 3 things, especially in like a resume or an online profile, is, can you demonstrate to me that you're curious somehow? Because to me, that's an indication of someone who can adapt and wants to learn and wants to know what the next thing is. That can be demonstrating that you've traveled, that you've learned a second or third or fourth language, that you have a hobby or a background or an interest that might be different than the other 60 of us in the agency. Because I always look at our culture somewhat as a stew of the individuals, and that we're all kind of different ingredients. And so we're always looking for new ingredients to that stew. We've talked a lot about no duplicates, or not duplicating the types of people that we have in the organization. So that's the other thing, is if you can somehow demonstrate that you're maybe a little bit different, or maybe have a varied skill set than the people that we might already have in our organization. And then variety of roles is one of those things that I've always responded to. And I had gotten some advice early in my career, which was, if you can, never do the same thing twice in a row. And that's where I even look at myself, having gone from big agency to a small agency, to having done automotive to retail to different categories. I think as an individual, it allows you to pick up different arrows to put in your quiver, so to speak, by learning from different people in different categories. And so really that variety and curiosity are a couple of the things that I'm hoping that somebody can really demonstrate, or at least I know it sparks to me when I feel like that's been demonstrated either in their resume or their online profile.
Awesome. Well, I imagine as far as curiosity goes, once you get to have a conversation with someone, do you think that the curious people sort of tend to demonstrate that by, the questions they're asking, or perhaps some enthusiasm for a topic? Do you again, once you're talking to them, do you start to feel that curiosity?
Absolutely. And part of what I generally try to do, even if I'm just having coffee with someone, is, let's talk business. Okay, and now let's park that and go, Eric, what makes you tick? Not to always turn it back to like, what are you reading, or like, what are you watching? But we hired a junior strategist probably a year and a half ago now. And I know one of the things that was the instant click for him was, I just said, well, what are you reading? And he listed 5 or 6 things that well, God, I think I actually picked up like 3 or 4 of the books that he
Yeah.
said he was reading. But to me, it also just demonstrated that, here's a 22, 23-year-old guy who's fresh out of school, but, is doing more than just this thing. And, a lot of what he was reading was, call it like history through economics.
Mhm.
There was a fascinating book called the Sugar King of Havana,
Yep.
which I read, and it was fantastic because it kind of gave me a perspective on like the sugar trade, what slavery was like in Cuba, the economics of, and then eventually what happened throughout that revolution. So again, it was
Yeah.
just one of those really interesting things that I wouldn't have expected a guy like him to be reading, but to me just demonstrated a natural curiosity,
Yeah.
to continue to learn in different ways and forms.
Yeah. So, well, so you listed some examples that you might see in an online portfolio or a resume, like learning a language or having traveled or some other things like that. Rebecca, advising students or people about, who are in the middle of their career, getting some, updated education or going out into the work world. Are there things that would come to mind for you that how somebody could demonstrate if they are really a curious person in a portfolio or a resume?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so I think of myself now as mid-career.
Mm-hmm.
Early career, I think specialization is part of the key because you really need to demonstrate some core strengths and skills. But I agree with Andrew, and I had in my notes for today as well, that this idea of layers or range to the kinds of things you've thought about and the kinds of industries that you've worked in, I think is so key. And I'm grateful now in mid-career that is, you've sort of gotten past the point of demonstrating your abilities, and now it's really about becoming a leader in terms of the way that you can think about business or about industry or about your work in unique ways. And so how do you demonstrate those layers? I think, being involved in interesting projects that are different from what people might expect is one way to do that. And so different kinds of projects could be just, other passions that you're interested in. I think people find it really fascinating when you love, in fact, I remember Matt Hibbard, one of our mutual friends, I remember he posts a lot about making bread, sourdough, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And that's a small thing, but it's just like wanting to develop expertise and layers that round you out as a human and not just as a worker, I think is one of the things that I would recommend. And so just posting about those things on social media and really allowing yourself the time and cognitive bandwidth to do some things that are maybe different or unexpected is important. One of the projects I'm doing this year, which, Andrew, you mentioned being curious, and I think of myself as a very curious person, and I love other people who are also curious. And we could spend all of our time sort of scrolling on Twitter and learning about current trends in technology, which is something that I love, and of course is central to our field. But I love that you talked about balancing history, because this year I'm trying to read a presidential biography starting in 1900 until today. So I can't remember the total number of books. It's around a dozen presidents that have served. And so I'm reading about President McKinley at like the turn of the 20th century. And I mean, they were like struggling with electricity and how do you like scale these things. And so you just think completely differently about what the world can look like and the kinds of things that were struggles then. And so it helps you feel that a lot of the struggles we're of course facing now and struggling with are so important. But it just gives you a sense of kind of what things are like at different points in time. And so I think balancing, like being really interested in the current trends, but also being interested in what has happened at different points of time. And Andrew, I wrote down The Sugar King of Havana. I'll have to check that out. I love reading a wide variety of things.
That one's great. There's I think it's just called Salt, and it's basically the history of salt and how wars were fought over salt.
Is that Mark Kurlansky, I think? Maybe?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great one. I tried to borrow a book from my sophomore in high school. I thought he was done with it. He wasn't, but I think it's like the history of the world through 6 cups. And so it talked about coffee, tea, wine, beer. I can't remember what the other 2 were, but I got about 2 pages into it. And then he said, no, I'm supposed to be reading that for history. I'm like, okay, well, I get that when you're done with it, please, because I do think there's always something fascinating just about, where have we been as a people, but where are we going? But also not just, the wars that were fought or the kings or the queens or what happened, but like, to me, the economics of it is always interesting to understand.
Yeah. And what's important about that, I think it's important for people to, hear that we have to make time for it, because it would be so easy to just be working and being in your inbox and being on Slack and checking what's new in the Twitter feed or whatever. And so you really do have to be intentional about it, I think. But I love that you mentioned that, and I'll echo that. I think that that's a really important way of developing those different layers to your identity.
I won't go too far down the book path, but if I'm recalling correctly, that SALT was Mark Kurlansky, which I'm looking at my Goodreads list to see if it was, because I know I read it. I think he also wrote Bird's Eye, which was about the guy who essentially invented frozen foods. And the guy's name was Birdseye. He was a really fascinating character. But I recommend that book. Of course, a number of books like this, but I recommend that book when you have basically a really smart young kid, high school student or whatever, who maybe doesn't know what to do with their energy or their intelligence. You had this person who went and invented a ton of stuff and was super successful. And I never would have read this book if not for the fact that I read other books by this author. And I thought, well, it's time to keep going down the path. So anyway.
I love that. It's great.
I posted this in the chat, but I'm sure my colleagues are tired of hearing of this. I did 184 books last year. And I can't remember what I did the year before. I think it was like 90, maybe 100, something like that. I'm on like book 10 or something this year. So I'm going a little slow.
184, that's amazing.
Yes, that I could never do that. That is admirable.
Well, thank you. I will give up on a book if I feel like it's not unique though. Salt was good. A History of the World in 6 glasses, cups, drinks, whatever, that was also good. Well, okay. So before I move on to the next question, I was going to save some Q&A for the end, but I think this question fits well in with some of the things that were discussed. So how do you differentiate? And I think the question is perhaps intended to be phrased like this. How do you differentiate yourself, I guess, and show the difference between what you're currently doing and what you wish you were doing? So if you had I guess perhaps if you had a job that's in a certain space or vertical, or maybe you're in client services and you really want to be in something else, how do I make myself stand out? And so that we don't all talk over each other, I'll go to Andrew first.
Sure. I think it's probably a little bit easier to do in a resume than maybe in like a social forum. But I think a results-oriented resume is one of those things that can help you demonstrate. So just using your example, if you were an accounts person or a business person, but wanting to be in more of a strategic role, well, number one, play the role of what it is that you're doing on a piece of business, but then also demonstrate, like, how did you lead a strategic process to X and Y and Z, so that as a manager, I might be able to project, this person has done this before, or this person at least demonstrates the curiosity too. I'll look back at some of the, I'd say more junior people that we, have, or that I've worked with over the years, and even just demonstrating, I got certified on Google AdWords. Even though I'm an account person, I got, getting certification or learning other skills to me is that demonstration of not just what I can do, but what I want to be doing. I would say, to the extent, don't ever overextend the credit that you're willing to take for success. But if you were a part of something great, like, stake your claim to it. One of the things that I always love to ask, and it's usually a follow-up question in an interview situation, is like, okay, you were a part of a team that did X, Y, Z, but like, what was your role specifically? And by demonstrating what that role is, to me, that's a way to help project how far might this person be able to stretch into either leading a more senior client or leading a more broad horizontal team. Or I've always said every account person or business person should be a strategist as well, because we're not just a conduit. We're not just the means by which information comes in and then we disseminate it through the rest of the agency. Like, you've got to understand it and set a vision.
And I guess keeping with that particular topic, briefly, Rebecca, you must advise people who perhaps have some work experience and maybe they're studying to, change their career, or they're working during school. And so on this question of differentiating between what you're doing and what you wish you were doing, do you have anything to add, I guess, or things you would tell people?
Yeah, great question. So I think when I think about something like a portfolio or something like that, I think showing a range of different projects that you've been involved in, and also, of course, I'm a communication person, so I obsess about language. It's all about the language that you're using to describe what you did and what your role is on the team. And so I think there's a lot more connections. That's one thing I think as a student of history, there's a lot more connections and similarity between things than sometimes we imagine. And so moving from, let's say, X to Y, trying to find what are those common threads. And then as you're describing what you've done with X, using some of the language or terms of Y, or thinking about the ways that it connects, either in terms of domain knowledge or in terms of skills. I think there's often a way to connect them sort of in terms of language and how you describe it. So that might be what I would focus on.
I would just add to that and say, like, as agencies, we tend to do that as well, where we look for parallel challenges. So has my agency worked in pharmaceuticals? No, but we've worked in highly complex categories with fiscally or legally conservative clients or organizations. So I would say we understand a lot of the underpinnings of that. Same thing with you as an individual. Have you worked in retail? No, but I have worked in a fast moving company that has done X and Y and Z and operates on a calendar planning cycle. I think there's always ways to draw parallels between what your experience might be and what the employer might be looking to project upon your abilities.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so this next question is related to some of the things you've already said, Rebecca, but you're advising students going out into the work world. And I suppose generally, what would you recommend that they have in an online resume or portfolio?
Yeah, great question. I think that a few things, I'll just make 3 quick points. One, I think I encourage people to think about a narrative of their work and also the arc of their career. And so I think in a portfolio, I'm imagining an online website, although we know this online presence thing is on social media and in your resume, but I'm sort of thinking about it as an online portfolio. So I want you to think about weaving together a narrative that explains some of the highlights of what you've done, but also has kind of an energy to it or a projection of where you want to go. And so there needs to be some sort of narrative arc. But then also, I think having a consistent brand identity across your portfolio and LinkedIn is important. And I think particularly so perhaps in our field, just this idea of having some consistency across the different channels is great. In terms of placement on the online portfolio, I think of above the fold. I know it's an old concept, but I think there's a reason that it made sense. Think about what are maybe the top 3 projects that you want people to see that demonstrate both excellence and what you've accomplished that was central to your role. So again, I think, Andrew, you're right. It has to be something that you really felt ownership of and can explain your role on. But then also those 3 things should demonstrate some range in your abilities. And that goes to what we were talking about earlier about, we're always moving or anticipating the next skills that we want to build. And so having some variety in those 3 pieces, I think, is also really important to think about.
So you mentioned social media a couple of times. I'm wondering if I'm looking to be hired, is LinkedIn the place to be? If I'm a designer, do I differentiate myself on, by posting stuff to Instagram? Does it matter? Or do I go for the portfolio that's, in my case, erickratom.com, which I don't own, by the way. Somebody's squatting on that. I did own it, and they spun up my old website. That's an aside. I won't go into it. But anyway, is there a certain place, like for 99% of people, this is where you should be?
There's so many different ways to answer that. I mean, I probably spend most of my time with LinkedIn and Twitter. That might be just in part because of my history with them or the network that I'm connected with. And so it's interesting to me, or those are places that I feel sort of are professional ecosystems or spaces. So related specifically to this question, but I think there are a lot of ways that people are using other channels very successfully, but I would probably focus on LinkedIn or Twitter in my comments.
And Andrew, whether it's you or somebody that works at RT, are there standard places that you're looking for people, or, you sort of go and do the Google check for them?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the default. I would say, like, anybody who's working should have a LinkedIn profile. You should do whatever you can to make it as robust as possible. There is kind of that question of like, well, when should somebody have a LinkedIn profile? I'd be curious to get a perspective of like, should a first year student in college have a LinkedIn profile, or is that too early? Or when is too early? But I'd say that tends to be the baseline. I do think what's interesting, especially more in the creative field, where has your work appeared? And it's not just award shows, but like, where have you been published, or where have you posted your work, or where are people commenting on it? The LinkedIn platform continues to get a little bit more robust in terms of being able to put pieces of work in there as a portfolio. But I would say, especially as a creative person, what's the website that you've got, or your Vimeo page, or a YouTube page, or whatever it might be that's the best place to demonstrate the body of work that you've done is, I'd say, critically important.
Rebecca, I suppose, when is the right time to create your LinkedIn account?
I would say as early as possible. I think of it sort of like a resume. In fact, I recently found a resume of mine from high school. And of course, it's funny to look back on artifacts like that. But I think that I'm glad that I got started with it, because over time, you build on it and you change it. And so for LinkedIn, I think it's the same. You get it started, you begin to learn the platform, you begin to learn the mechanics of just sort of some of the basics. And then as you spend time watching the feed and seeing how other people engage, you'll come to know it better. So I would say it's never too early, but recognizing that, of course, if you look back on your LinkedIn from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you would giggle in the same way that I did when I looked at my resume from, high school. There was no good formatting. It was just, and that's fine. But I think I'm glad I got started with it, because over time that document has morphed every year. And I think your LinkedIn profile does the same.
I can understand that. Well, I'm going to move on to our next question. Andrew, it's time to get out your crystal ball. And you kind of, you talked about this a little bit, preparing for the future, or things are always changing. So what are the skills, traits, or really anything else that you think marketers are going to be hiring for in the future?
I think it goes back to people who can learn and who can shapeshift and can get a sense of like, where is the world going? App developer was not a job when I was in college. I'm dating myself here. Like, website designer was probably maybe becoming a job when I was in school. And so you think of some of those just fundamental changes that our industry has had to go through. But I think the common thread, is finding people who are flexible, finding people who have the ability to do a multitude of things. We sometimes call people like that slashers, where somebody is a art director / designer / motion graphics person / can do some web design / can do some. We've got to find a better term, because slashers just sounds awful, but you get the idea. It's people that have multiple skills. I think it's also important that we all become more fluid and fluent in using some of the tools ourselves. When somebody says, well, here's my deck, but I'm not a designer. No, but I can tell from the background in your home that you've put yourself together and you're wearing an outfit that makes sense. So I can tell you have aesthetic. So, everybody, I think, to some degree, has to be a little bit more comfortable doing their own work. That was definitely a thing that was eye-opening for me coming to this market. How many art directors are their own designers, are their own photo retouchers, and do things not self-contained or not self-reliant, but it's just very different than larger agencies or agencies maybe on the coast, where it's like, yeah, we'll get somebody to shoot that, we'll get somebody to to retouch that, and everything was kind of outsourced. There's very much a like in-source, self-sustained mentality here. I think that's one of those things that's going to like continue to be important, especially as marketers can get content from a million different places that aren't necessarily agencies or aren't necessarily consultancies. They're individual makers who can, pick up a camera, edit their own video, and do their own thing all by themselves.
Yeah. Well, so you, I think I know where you're going to go here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When you're looking at someone's resume, talking to them, whatever it is, at least today, what would you see, or what might they say that might make you excited for the future? Like that person has something we've never hired for that before, or that's really innovative. Like we can do something new as a result of something that's on the bleeding edge, let's say. What might those things be?
I think that's where I just like to ask again, like, if you're a curious person, like what have you seen in the last 2 years that has really like excited you, and why? Or what have you seen that has kind of blown your mind and you've said, I don't know how they did that? And it might not even be in marketing. I love cooking. I love watching Top Chef. I love watching some of the gastro things where like, I don't even know what the heck you're doing. I love listening to or watching music, and I'm a very bad guitarist, but where I will watch someone go, I don't even know how the hell you did that. But again, like having that sense of curiosity and being able to speak to, like, what are some things that have blown your mind? And then even if you didn't take the next step to figure out how that happened, just identifying like things that inspire you or things that make you want to learn more is something that's key for me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Andrew, this panel was like perfectly compelled because I love the cooking shows, and when they do all the weird, like, I don't know what's called, gastromolecular or whatever, where they're doing these food things that it breaks.
Some foam, and now we're going to put some smoke in a bubble.
Yeah. I love that. And there's something about it, and maybe it's the discipline that it takes to like really be able to perfect those very technical things. Obviously in our fields, it's different technical things that we're sort of working on building the discipline to perfect, but there's an appreciation or an admiration for people that are doing that kind of edge work. I guess I'll add to what Andrew said. One of the things that I think is really interesting in our field is when people are working with automations and data and beginning to understand how different data systems can work together. In marketing, a lot of what you can see, in like email systems or databases like Salesforce or whatever, you can build so many automations to manage relationships for the company. And I think that's the sort of thing that will allow companies to scale. And so for me, some of the things that jump out, I do like when people have I find it interesting when people in our field have some familiarity with coding, or at least are comfortable with the software development world. The whole reason that I decided to add software development to my skill set was, I think it was in 2012, there was someone at a PRSA event who said, if someone in communication knows how to do coding, they'll always get an interview or something. And they said this in 2012. And I remember just like holding on to that as a thing in the back of my mind, like, why? And it was a different stage of my career. And I hadn't at the time started studying it, but it was like, just attending that event put that little seed in my mind that later made me think, like, why was that so compelling to that person? Maybe there's more connections between these areas than I think. And of course, now 10 years later, we can see how deep, automation is becoming in marketing and communication. And so they were right, even though it was 2012. And at the time, I remember thinking, like, I don't get it. Why is that such a thing? But so that's one other thing that I might mention. Even tools like Google Data Studio, that's one that I've taught in some classes before. And it's a relatively it's a relatively accessible software for data visualization, and there's a ton of great tools, and it's free. So there's really no reason not to play around with it, and I think in so doing, you just get a little bit more comfortable with how do you pull data from here, and then you get into tools like if this and that and Zapier, and how do you build automated pipelines, so it's pulling stuff from Twitter and putting it in a Google Sheet that's then automatically connecting to this Google Data Studio. That's very possible to do. It's certainly within the skill set of our sort of marketing professional, but it sounds a little bit scary if you've never done it. But I think that those kinds of things demonstrated confidence for someone to lean into that and say, no, I'm going to test it out. I'm going to watch a few YouTube videos on it, or watch some of the documentation Google's put out about it, and then, figure it out. So I like that sort of thing right now, is maybe what I would add.
Yep. Thank you. Well, some of the most valuable people that I have ever worked with, at least in my judgment, are the people that you can tell they're excited by their work, or they're interested by their work. And not that I suggest that anybody like work around the clock. I mean, I want to spend time with my kids and all that. And sometimes I want the workday to be over at a certain time, but there are certain people that, that they go home and they're going to spend a little bit of time reading an email newsletter, or maybe they're going to do a little bit of freelancing or whatever it is. And they're going to try new things, and they're going to come back with new ideas. It's probably a lot easier if you happen to have the lifestyle or whatever that allows you to have time outside of your, sort of 9 to 5 work, of course. And maybe if you're younger or don't have kids or whatever your circumstances are, I can totally understand that. But it may even get to what we were talking about curiosity. Sometimes you can tell that this person just loves what they do. And that's why, maybe they're, I don't know what role they happen to have, but they have no need to know about Google Data Studio, but they've used it before, and then they can start plugging things together and doing the slashing, being a slasher, as you were talking about, Andrew.
I love the slasher one. That's cool.
So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is for Rebecca. Rebecca, if you had to guide someone in their job search, what would you say are the must-haves and must-dos? And we've touched on some of them, like must they be active on LinkedIn, but should people attend networking events? Now, I mean, pandemic and all of that, that the answer to that question may depend on our current circumstances, but are those things passé, or should somebody just try and stand out on TikTok? Maybe there's something else that are the must-haves and must-dos.
Yeah, that's great. And clearly everyone here is made the choice to click the link and come to the networking event. And I think that's great, because I think that it just interrupts your day in a very productive way. So in terms of what I would advise, number one, I think any participation in networking or social media, or sort of that reaching out, needs to be authentic to your preferences. So I remember there was a gentleman I worked with in the past. He was an athletic director, and he was very shy. And it was interesting because I sort of first met him on Twitter. He was very active on social media. He was very active on Twitter, and he was always playing a part in the discussions that were sort of happening at the university, and just getting involved. He created these little rituals, like every morning he would post sort of a quote. He had a couple of hashtags that he would post with different things, and that it became sort of rituals. And I remember when I met him, I said something about, how I felt like I knew him because of Twitter. And he said, well, I'm actually really shy. And so for me, Twitter is a way to participate in those worlds asynchronously, and when I sort of have the bandwidth to do it. And so I think for some people, if you're extroverted, networking events are fantastic. I love meeting people, and I love walking into a room and just sort of seeing, what people are talking about. So that fits me very well. But I recognize that many people do not like that, not even just in person, but they might be nervous to even join a Zoom because they're not sure how many people are going to be there, or is everyone's video going to be on, or, how many people are going to be there. And so I think social media can be great to fill in the gap, because with social media, you can control a little bit more when you participate and the curation of what you put out, as opposed to in-person spontaneous. If you say the wrong thing, if that's the kind of thing that upsets you or keeps you up at night, then, it might be social media that would be better. I also I love Social Media Club St. Louis, and I was formerly on the board, which is where I met Matt. And I think working on projects with people is a great way to get involved and to sort of network. It's not a traditional networking event, but joining a committee or a board and actually doing projects with people reveals so much about your work style, and you can get to be really close with people in planning different events and just talking about kind of those professional associations. So I would say thinking about joining a committee or board, which I know is, maybe sounds like, oh, it's going to be too much time or whatever, but I think from a networking perspective, it is a tremendous boost. I have told so many students to get involved with projects so you can demonstrate your professional expertise and get to know some people that way.
Awesome. Thank you. Andrew, any must-haves or must-dos for an online resume or portfolio or job search, I guess?
I would say put yourself out there. Not my adage, somebody said it before me, but like build the network when you don't need the network.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you need the network, it might be too late to build it. And I think that's where, things like LinkedIn, things like this event, just having a sense for like who else is out there in the world in your space, not even necessarily geographically. I would say reconnect with people. And I know I'm not the best at this, but I had an opportunity, I guess it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, to be interviewed as a part of a podcast for a guy that I used to work with 20 years ago, maybe, who leads an agency in Milwaukee. And man, what an amazing thing it was to reconnect with him and to reconnect with some of the other people that we had worked with through that. And I think it's that great reminder of not just build the network, but like maintain the network and even dig back through and go, boy, who haven't I connected with in some time that is just an interesting person. We, especially in our industry, we tend to go so fast and so quickly in so many fronts. And then it's like that chapter closes and you're on to the next one. And you go, well, wait a minute, there were all sorts of interesting people in that chapter that I used to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week with. And all of a sudden I'm not anymore. But what is it that you can do to maintain and continue building those relationships? Because I do think part of being a lifelong learner is always absorbing the perspectives of other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And, follow that line. Certainly not everybody here can do this, but the way that Andrew and I met was my family and I moved to St. Louis in January of 2019. And about a year later, I started reaching out to a number of people who were connections of connections on LinkedIn. And I looked them up and I thought, hey, looks like you have an interesting background. I don't have anything to sell. I'm not looking for a job. Can I buy you coffee? And Andrew said yes. And I think I remember talking for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And it's been a long time since then. Of course, we've had a pandemic and all of that. But, it's still nice to have the connections and to know if you have some shared interests or anything of that nature. Because exactly as you said, it's, it helps to have the relationship when you might eventually need it rather than to reach out for the first time. And so if you're here, you can't necessarily do the same thing, like if you're not moving or whatever, but if you were moving, that's a really great time. Probably if you've already got a job and you don't need to sell something, you're new to a town. Maybe if you're new to an industry, you reach out to people and do a sort of, I don't know, informational interview type thing, but just getting to know people and then being a good connection and a good resource, I think really helps a lot. So this is a social media club event. We talk about digital marketing and all that, but I'm going to go to the Q&A with Matt Hibbert's question. We've referenced Matt now and then. So social media changes daily. So if social media was important for their knowledge base, for their execution, how is it that you stay relevant and grab an employer's attention with your knowledge or whatever it is? And I'm going to go to Rebecca first.
Yeah, I think, being unafraid to try new things is the key. And so one of the things that, because I like social media, I've been very involved in social media. Sometimes when a new platform or something comes out, sometimes I'll create an account that has nothing to do with my name just to play around a little bit. And so then it's a little bit less pressure. I don't connect with everyone firsthand. I don't, connect it with my contacts, so that it's just sort of a playground, I guess, or an account where you can just get to know it a little bit better. Because sometimes I think people are just get nervous to try new things because they don't want all their contacts to be notified that they've joined something or whatever. So I think thinking of it as a playground and being comfortable trying just completely new platforms, or trying it, sort of keeping an eye on what other people are doing and then testing and trying to replicate it. I mean, I watch YouTube videos almost daily on something little that I'll see, a way that somebody's connected an email newsletter to their Twitter account. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Let's see how they did that and try to replicate it. So I think just having that attitude of playfulness a little bit. And when you see other people doing things, trying to recreate it. It's probably like cooking. When you taste something or you want to recreate that thing, in the next go around.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I've told a number of people this story, so it's entirely possible if I have coworkers here or whatever that this is an old story for them. But so I joined Twitter a year after it started, and it was still relatively small at the time. And I had a lot of free time at the time. So, I was also early on Reddit. So I was finding very juvenile stuff on Reddit and tweeting it constantly. So it was like a mix of marketing and really, young male interest stuff. It was a great feed, I'm sure. But it was like 100 tweets a day, if not more, and interacting with people and all that. And through this activity, I ended up being a very highly followed account at the time on Twitter. But for a long time frame, I was the most retweeted account on Twitter. And the reason for it was not because I was legitimately great by any means, but I figured something out. And that was that every Twitter account had an RSS feed. And there were tools, even back then, like 2008, 2009, that when you posted a blog post, it would use your RSS feed to auto tweet your blog post. Well, I created like 20 or 30 Twitter accounts, and I set them all up to use my Twitter RSS feed as the feed. And, back then the retweet button didn't exist. So you had to do RT at Eric Kratom. And so I just appended that to the beginning, pre-pended it, whatever the word would be. And then it would fill in with my tweet. So every time I tweeted, in addition to all of the people who would retweet me and respond, I'd get like 20 or 30 retweets. And that lasted for about a year. Of course, you see all the great places that it took me, of course, but
what a great story.
Eric, are you a robot?
I had a lot of time, let's say. And I wish that it had been totally genuine. A lot of it was genuine, but mostly maybe I shouldn't think it's funny, but I still think it's funny because, it was not that hard to figure this out. And it's actually a lot like Data Studio or something else. When you're an agency or a freelancer or whatever it is, analysis and insights are probably going to take time. But like going and grabbing, I don't know, screenshots or something, or getting data and, manipulating it into an Excel chart, that's something that a computer should be able to do most of it, not always. And so as much as reasonably possible, if I have to use Google Data Studio or I'm using a paid tool, Domo or whatever it is, I want to figure out whatever it is that I can to focus my time on the highest value work, which for my clients should be what takes a lot of thought, not what is like, grabbing things and moving them around. And one of those was, it's like, I can charge a client for 10 hours where 5 of them are just grabbing charts, or I can charge them for 5 hours of time, and it's better for them and it's better for me because I get to do the exciting stuff. It's just a matter of figuring the stuff out.
It's interesting. What really underlies that is having the confidence to screw up and not be afraid of not being perfect. And this is something that I find a lot of young people struggle with, especially early careers. Like, you're trying so hard to demonstrate your professionalism and your expertise. And so doing something that you probably are going to fail at multiple times before you get it right, which is like most technical work, it can be really hard because it takes a lot of confidence to just start figuring out, how do I connect to the RSS feeds, and no one else was doing it. And so I think that I love that story, and it speaks to sort of an underlying confidence of just like, let's just get in there and try. And if I screw it up, it's fine.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Thank you. Well, I think that speaks to, there was a comment in the chat from Julie Francisco, I think, and And she said, the internet did not exist until my senior year of college, and most everything I do today was on the job training, self-taught. So, just taking the time to figure things out and having an opportunity, like Andrew has pointed out about the slasher, role, or people who have the curiosity or they have the opportunity in their job or whatever it is. And it's like, you identify there's something to be done and you're going to go and try it. That's whether you do it at home or you do it on the job. People who are willing to step up and take a chance, hopefully, are going to have more opportunities to keep, as I said, stepping up. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and there are a couple of questions in the chat. So I'm going to go to the one that is directed at Rebecca. And it says, what motivated Rebecca to obtain many degrees, and which degree did you enjoy the most?
Yeah, good question. I would say each of them for very different reasons. But it's a combination of them, I think, that has been the most fun because, obviously, if I was interested in being a professor, I had to have a deep subject knowledge expertise in one area. And so that is part of it. Why did I add in this master's in software development? I think because I really just started to take one class. I took an intro to Python class, or it was software development 600, intro to, I don't know, something related to Python. And I just loved it. And so that's what made me continue on with additional classes. So I wasn't intending to do the degree when I started it, but just testing the waters and trying out one little thing, it does snowball. And before you know it, I had taken all the classes. So yeah, and in terms of, there's another part of the question about imposter syndrome, being able to deliver, and valued institutional learning versus more informal learning. I do love informal learning, and I do a lot of learning and reading of just different things that are not ever connected to a course. But I found the structure of the degree program and the coursework to be very motivating because there's only so much time. And so doing just informal learning, it can be easy when there are any number of things happening in the world that take up your attention. It can be easy to just put it aside, and before you know it, it's 5 years later and you've not done it. So I like the structure that institutional learning provides, and also the community of having other people that are learning at the same time is something that has been really valuable for me. Awesome,
thank you. There's another question in the Q&A that I'm going to go to Andrew with. So this person said, as a slasher creative with diverse skill sets and digital interest, will my LinkedIn learning certificates bring any value to my freelancer resume and portfolio? So, whether you're the person who's looking at LinkedIn certificates or somebody else, can you imagine that having those types of things are going to make somebody stand out or bring some value?
I would certainly say they're never going to hurt. I think something like a LinkedIn certificate might actually help you be found, is maybe the way to think about that. So whether it's somebody who's in a creative resourcing role, whether at an agency, at a client's company, or at one of the services that place freelancers, looking for somebody who has a specific illustration, animation, sound editing, motion, just some of those things I think might help you become findable. And then the question is going to be like, how do you demonstrate or how do you exercise that? I wanted to riff on something that Rebecca had said too, in terms of topics for 2022. What can you learn with someone? The few times that I've been able to go to either an offsite training or an immersive training session, and it's been with other people, it has been, and now get with that small group and discuss what you've just been through. And to be able to do it with colleagues and coworkers has been incredibly helpful, to come back and have a common vernacular or a common understanding, or even the ability to go I didn't see it that way, you did, and debate. So as you think about 2022, data, it's all over the place, especially as a creative. How can you demonstrate that you are data informed or data inspired? But I would say, if there's somebody that you work with on a regular basis, how can you pair up with someone and get a skill set together, especially as perhaps a freelance team or a freelance duo? And frankly, just to be able to push and pull with someone as you're learning a new skill might be helpful as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
I love that advice. That's a great idea.
Well, I was sent this question directly rather than in the Q&A, but I like this one. So I'm going to put this one out there, and I'll probably go to Andrew first as well. So this person said, I'm happy in my current job, but someone approached me about a job that is a great opportunity with better compensation. How do I talk to my current employer if I don't want to leave, but I do want to make sure that I'm valued at the level of the other offer? That's interesting.
Sure. I'd say first and foremost, make sure you know what you do and don't want. And I think I would say, make sure you understand your motivation for why you want to broach it with your current employer. And if it is to demonstrate, hey, look, I'm marketable and I want to either, get access to a different project or a different degree of things, I think there's no harm in doing that. But like I said, I would make sure that you look yourself in the mirror and have the intention of like, I'm not going to accept that role. For X and Y and Z reason before. And I think it's always safe to say, hey, look, I've been approached by someone about something. I'm not going to take it. But what was interesting or intriguing about it to me was it would afford me the opportunity to learn a new skill set, branch out in a different area, travel internationally, whatever it is that might be the thing that's appealing. And I would just add on top of that, again, not my adage, but most people who would say that they made a decision just based on money oftentimes regret it.
Yeah.
And that's, one of a dozen factors that I think you need to bear in mind in terms of what either your current career path is looking like, or even what an option within that path might look like.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. With that, I'm going to wrap up because we have just a few minutes left. So first and foremost, I want to thank Rebecca Dohrman of Olin Business School at Washington University and Andrew Dowska of Rogers Townsend. And I forgot to mention, did I see, Andrew, that you were nominated for or won a bunch of awards recently? Is that correct?
One recently, yeah, the Addies were, my time continuum is just shot last Thursday.
Yeah.
I think is when we were honored with 50 plus things. And so that was the first local round, and then they'll move on to the regional round and then hopefully eventually on up to nationals. But it was, it was a great showing for us. I've always said, hey, look, we don't chase lucite just for the heck of it, but it's a great recognition, for the thinking and the work. And it's not just the creative people who made it, it's the entirety of the team and the clients.
That's awesome.
That bring that great work to life as well.
Well, congratulations. And so, please do look up Rebecca and Andrew and their organizations, connect with them as appropriate. Thank you both for your time and for joining us today. And thank you to everyone in attendance. I hope you'll join us in the future. And goodbye, everybody.